All right, on the nostalgia, let's go back to a memorable moment in 2005, May 14, 2005 to be exact, as Ronald Winky Wright, the Wink, full disclosure, I slant towards the Wink, St. Petersburg, Florida's Winky Wright, have interviewed him probably no less than a dozen times locally, nationally, etc., before fights, after fights. We've had him on this podcast feed, breaking things down. Winky with one tremendous win after another in main event fights, but maybe, Dan Rafael, I say to you, none bigger than the win, the upset of Felix Trinidad that occurred on May 14th, 2005. You were there. So tell me more about Trinidad took a real risk here, and Winky Wright beat him.
Well, I agree with you that it's the biggest win of the Wink's career. You could argue, I guess, for obvious reasons, that when he got the opportunity to fight Shane Mosley in the first fight for the undisputed title, he was the IBF champion. Shane had the WBA and the WBC titles. This was back in the day in 2004, where undisputed meant 3 title belts. And he got the opportunity when no one would fight him, and he beat Shane Mosley. So that was huge for him. But in terms of, I think the amount of money he made, the fact that it was a pay-per-view main event, had a huge crowd, had a big promotion, certainly bigger than the Shane Mosley fight. Yeah, Trinidad was a bigger star than Shane Mosley. That had to be the biggest fight. So just to set up the context, he beat Shane to become the undisputed champion in March of 2004. They have an immediate rematch in November of 2004 because Shane Mosley exercised that contractual right. They had the rematch. He lost Shane again in the rematch, and Winky, at that point, it was no longer undisputed because, of course, the IBF doing IBF things. That belt was not at stake. But nonetheless, he won 2 fights in a row against Sugar Shane Mosley, and now he's going to move up to the middleweight division to fight Tito Trinidad, which was a big step up in terms of just the overall profile because it was a main event. They're going to do the fight at the MGM Grand. Now, in terms of where Felix Trinidad was, obviously he made his name as a great champion as a welterweight, became a champion, unified champion at junior middleweight. Obviously, had the massive win and the huge fight with Fernando Vargas. So he's now done his business in terms of being as a middleweight. Okay, he's already taken the loss to Bernard Hopkins. He finished out his contract with HBO against Hassan Sharifi, and then he retired for like 2.5 years. He came back. He scored a big win against Ricardo Mayorga. Super exciting, massive crowd at Madison Square Garden. Terrific action fight, but Trinidad dominated, gets the 8th round knockout. And now he's going to fight again. That was October of 04. Now he's going to come back in May of 2005, and he's fighting Winky Wright. Now, let me tell you, TJ, you don't have to be a boxing expert to know that the difference in fighting Ricardo Mayorga to fighting Winky Wright is as great a distance as from like here to like the outer depths of the universe. I mean, they couldn't be more different. In Winky Wright, you have a stylish southpaw with good speed. Winky was among the top elite, top handful of pound-for-pound fighters on everybody's list. He's got a great chin. He's got a ramrod jab. He's got very difficult defense. He can move. He can box. And he's got, like I said, tremendous jab. That's the weapon. Mayorga, brawler, chin out in the air, no defense to speak of, not that fast, just wants to mix it up. Open target for the big left hooks from Tito Trinidad. So I always gave Felix Trinidad credit for taking the fight. And while the betting public was all over Trinidad, there was a lot of people that were like, what the hell are you doing? I remember thinking to myself, well, I'm kind of surprised that you're fighting Winky Wright. I'm not unhappy about it, but I'm like, okay. It was sort of a weird whatever. Now, they made it a WBC title eliminator. That's not why he took the fight. That just happened to be the sanction that came along with it. Now, as we've discussed before, I had been in Las Vegas the previous week for the first fight between Diego Corrales and Jose Luis Castillo. That was the previous Saturday at the Mandalay Bay. Myself and a handful of other writers stayed for the week, and the reason was because this fight was the following Saturday at the MGM. So I moved out of the Mandalay Bay and moved over to the MGM and covered this whole fight week, and it was a big buildup. And Winky was super. I always remember, and he was always confident for his fights, but like he'd get asked about like Trinidad's left hook, and he would like, "What are you talking about? I'm not going to get hit with it." You thought he's joking, but he's like, "I'm not going to get hit with it." Anyway, they put on the fight, and Winky Wright, he didn't just win. It's one thing to win; it's another thing to dominate. And this was kind of sad in a way. He basically embarrassed Trinidad. embarrassed. Trinidad is an all-time great fighter. A zillion welterweight title defenses. Controversial or not, had the big win in the mega fight against Oscar to unify the titles. Had a bull in a china shop through the junior middleweight division with the wins he had against David Reed, and obviously, finishing up with the unification against Fernando Vargas, a crowd favorite. Could not do anything with Winky Wright. It was like a boy pulling flies off wings off a fly. And as I remember sitting there ringside, every single round, it was like half a dozen times where he would throw out a clean jab and Trinidad's head would rock back. And by the end of the night, he might have had a concussion from it. He looked like a human bobblehead. I mean, in the end, Winky Wright won the fight 120 to 107, 119 to 108, and 119 to 108. And Trinidad lost a point in the ninth round for low blows, and Winky just kept on doing his thing. Could not miss with the jab, the right jab down the middle. He couldn't do anything.
It was like Lionel Richie all night long. And the thing is Winky had the high guard from Dan Birmingham and the St. Pete Boxing Club. And again, I love the background of knowing Winky Wright going all the way back to 1994, Dan Rafael. That's when I first met him and began talking to him, and he got a world title shot against, what was it, Julio Cesar Vasquez, I think was the title shot that he got. And Birmingham was preaching back in the 90s. He is so hard to hit, excellent defensive fighter because of the high guard and the discipline. And that's, here it is 11 years later, and Felix Trinidad couldn't solve that high guard. And you love because we've related this before. A friend of mine, a good friend of mine, was on a work trip to San Juan, Puerto Rico for his company. And the night of this pay-per-view in the San Juan town square, they had thousands, if not 10,000 or more in the middle of the town square of San Juan watching on the big TVs. They're all waving the Puerto Rican flags. They're chanting, they're singing, they're doing whatever. By about the 7th or 8th round, the flag stopped waving, as the friend relayed the story. By about the 9th or 10th round, it had begun to empty out. And before they ever read the decision, it was basically abandoned with the flags all over the ground. They all knew he had lost that night to Winky Wright before the decision was even read. Crazy how good he was.
So, to nobody's surprise, Trinidad, a couple of days after the fight, announced his retirement once again, went back into retirement. So his second retirement. He did, this is May of 2005. He did come out of retirement in January of 2008 and had one last fight against Roy Jones, which is amazingly was a really big deal when they were both well past their best. Trinidad was fighting all the way up at 170 pounds for that fight, but they were superstars. So when you look at Tito's career, it was a great career. He only had 3 losses. He got knocked out by Bernard Hopkins for the undisputed middleweight title in the final of the tournament in 2001. Got absolutely embarrassed by Winky in this particular fight, and then lost his career ender against Roy Jones. But what Winky Wright did that night, that's like the legacy fight. I mean, again, he had some other big wins. He had a draw with Jermaine Taylor for the middleweight title. A lot of people thought he won. I mentioned the 2 victories against Sugar Shane Mosley. He did win the title, as you mentioned, against Vasquez, even though that wasn't like a high-profile fight. But he beat like Ike Quartey in one of his fights, before he petered out and lost to guys like Bernard Hopkins and Paul Williams near the end of his career, and Peter Quillen actually in his final fight. But he's a Hall of Famer. As is Trinidad, as is Bernard Hopkins, the guys who fought each other. But I dare say, TJ, that on that night, that Winky Wright, who, yes, Tito had his liabilities in terms of his skills to deal with the kind of technical boxer and the great jab that Winky Wright had. But I still would tell you that on that night, the way that jab was working and the condition that Winky was in and the mindset that he had, he would have, I'm not saying he beats every middleweight ever or anything like that, but that Winky Wright, that version of Winky Wright, in that mindset with that jab, he's going to be in every fight that you could ever think of in the middleweight division. That Winky Wright that night would have given Marvin Hagler a hard fight. Okay, I'm not saying he wins. I'm just saying it's a legitimate match.
Hard to hit, fast hands, good left jab, good movement.
Good right jab as a southpaw.
A good right jab, excuse me. Good right jab. Yeah, I'm with you. And again, I'm biased being around that.
And one thing, by the way, Winky, no matter who you pick him out as a middleweight, he had a terrific chin.
Yes.
The guy had 6 losses in his career, never stopped, and he fought some very quality fighters.
And I still remember Oscar De La Hoya telling me around that Ike Quartet fight. I was in the press conference area, and we were interviewing Oscar, and I actually got a chance to talk to him one on one. He would never remember me, but I said to him, "You've never fought Winky Wright," and he said, "There's a reason that I've never." I'm paraphrasing. He said, I am never going to fight him. Too
That
difficult to
was
hit
the
him. Too
that
difficult
was the
to deal
one
with him.
guy. I
Yeah,
mean, again, I'm not saying Oscar was like, he fought everybody, but at one time there was a push by Winky's people, the publicist Fred Sternberg mainly, because at that time Winky was the IBF champion. Oscar had the WBA and the WBC. They could have fought for the undisputed title. Of all the great accomplishments that Oscar De La Hoya had in his career, he was never the undisputed title in any of the various weight classes in which he won world titles. But he probably made the right decision not to fight Winky Wright.
because
And the other thing about Winky that I always had respect for, yes, this was in Las Vegas, was a huge American event, but the guy was the ultimate road warrior. The guy fought in
yes.
South Africa, he fought in the UK, he fought in America, he fought in France, he fought all over the place.
Willing
Because
to
he
go
didn't
do
have a
that.
choice if he wanted to make a living.
Yeah, De La Hoya had watched the Vargas fight, which Winky got robbed of that decision. He had watched the Mosley fight where he pulled the upset and looked great and couldn't get hit. And then he watched this fight with Trinidad.
I can't say that the Vargas fight was a robbery. It was really close, and you can argue he won, but it wasn't a robbery. It was that kind of close fight.
He won that fight.
It was close. It was
Uh,
close.
in any event, great night for the Wink that night on May the 14th of 2005.